2012. If you were a dairy farmer, you will remember it well. The year Fish and Game unleashed its Dirty Dairying campaign. So much has changed in that time for the good on farm in New Zealand environmentally. We must acknowledge that. But the way it was executed with its such anti-farming sentiment that rippled not only into our elections, but into our international markets. Now, 8 years later, the government is calling for a review of the NGO and the anti-farming chair has been ousted. Farmer and Fish and Game Councillor Richard McIntyre joins us now. Good evening, sir.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Now, first, to discuss ahead of opening weekend, a ritual for rural New Zealanders. I'd like to, you when we discussed earlier, of course, we want to focus on the positives, the future for Fish and Game. Now that long-term chairman Lindsay Lyons is gone, what's the sentiment in the council now?
So I'm not on the National Council, I'm only on the Wellington Council, so I can't speak too much for the National Council, but from the councillors I've talked to, there's a feeling of relief and everyone's happy to be moving forwards with a slightly more balanced environmental sort of campaign, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly. It's been frustrating being on the sidelines, I'm sure. And of course, it's interesting that the government's certainly throwing their weight behind an inquiry and a review.
Yes, yeah. Look, I guess like every organisation, a review from time to time is a good thing to make sure that basically the structure is still fit for purpose, and that everything's functioning well. So it's a good thing that the government's wanting to do it. Certainly, if they're paying for it, that's fantastic as well. And hopefully, we find a good way forward as a result.
COVID-19's proved very difficult to navigate for hunters and fishermen across the country. But relief to sort of have some certainty around level 2 restrictions.
Oh, definitely. I think every duck shooter and deer hunter were getting pretty itchy, as we went through the various weeks of lockdown, and certainly the uncertainty around, if we would have an opening weekend, and if so, when would it be, and trying to organise all of that has been playing on a lot of keen duck shooters and game bird hunters in general's minds.
Duck shooting etiquette is going to be pretty hard to keep 2 metres apart and social distancing in those mai-mais. What are some of those messages you're trying to get out there, though, to keen hunters this weekend to be able to stay safe?
Look, it's really about following the level 2 criteria. Trying to keep that physical distancing. If you're not feeling well, staying away. As much as everyone wants to get out and go duck shooting. We need to be safe and think of the others around us in that respect.
A good hot toddy at the end of the day might be able to knock COVID on the head. Though, Richard, what whereabouts? I'm really intrigued. For a man of your profile within Fish and Game, you like to go on opening weekend without giving too much away.
I shoot on my neighbour's lake with them, which is pretty cool. So yeah, historically we've driven a couple of hours to Central Hawke's Bay to shoot on a lake that our family's shot on for a couple of generations. But the last few seasons I've just driven about 300 metres down the road and turned right sort of thing, and I've been at my neighbour's place. So that's been pretty cool.
Nice. Now, putting another hat on there with your Federated Farmers chair on the Share Milkers Committee. It's moving day very shortly, and of course there's been some uncertainty around that with COVID. Is everybody feeling okay about moving day?
Yeah, certainly everyone's feeling a lot more comfortable. When we initially sort of went through the process to get government approval for moving day to go ahead, we're thinking we'd probably be level 3, level 4, and there was a lot. It was going to be a lot more complicated, I suppose, for the shift. People that had organised their friends and family to help them were potentially not going to be able to do that, and would either have to do it within their own bubble or hire moving companies. Whereas now under level 2, things have loosened up quite a bit, and so the friends and family can come and help. They just obviously need to be recorded as to who's there, etc., and practice physical distancing where possible.
And of course, it's that time when there's a lot of things up for review, and of course, going into new contracts for contract milkers. Has there been there's new legal agreements that Fonterra can help support with? Is there any sort of changes or advice from that Federated Farmers can do to support these contract milkers?
Yeah, so it's a pretty exciting time for the share milker section and the share milker farm owner sections, because we've actually just released a new contract milking agreement, which we think will be a big step forwards for contract milking. It's designed, it's modernized completely, but it's also designed to help sort of smooth some of the risk areas that had caused contract milkers to come stuck in the past and to sort of go out of business.
What are some of those things? Sorry, I am not as in depth in the dairy industry, so I'd really love to know.
Yeah, sure. So particularly for contract milking, like with variable share milking, you've obviously got the milk price going up and down, which can, play havoc with income, and profit. But for contract milking, there are the various liabilities that aren't necessarily insurable, such as damage to houses and vehicles, etc. And also the big one is any sort of a shift in feed supplied. That will essentially cause a drop in milk production, which essentially causes a big drop in profit.
And so really firming up the financial security going into contract milking full stop. And good for the financial backing for these guys as well.
Exactly. So what we've sort of looked to do is to make sure that the contract milker takes on some risk because they are in business, and it's part of being in business. There's a risk reward sort of a relationship there. But we wanted to make sure that they didn't take on so much risk that they went out of business. So the way the contract's structured, the basically the expected profit from the agreement, the farm owner will guarantee a certain percentage of it, which will range depending on the scale of the farm between 60 and 85%, with the average being about 70%.
Next up, Richard, we're going to be talking about redeploying. It's a word that I'm using more and more now, but it's a real struggle to get staff into the dairy industry. And this is not a COVID issue. This has been going on for a really long time. What would you like to see in terms of conditions of work to improve the attractiveness of people into the dairy sector? Or is it just purely because they don't want to work in that sector?
Look, I think in the past, dairy farmers have been reasonably hard on employers. Back when I began, it was every third weekend off, and you worked, sort of 60 hours a week, and that was supposed to be normal. Whereas times have changed, and that's certainly not acceptable to the young people leaving school these days, and so we're having to adapt with it. But unfortunately, the stigma of dairy farmers as employers in the past has sort of stuck with us. So I think a lot of it's actually about advertising, what we're doing now, the smart rosters that we've got, especially farms with a little bit of scale, have the ability to have some really, really good socially acceptable rosters, and working conditions. So I think advertising that, what we're looking to do within the share milker section is continue to improve that progression pathway to show the bright up and coming people that there's really quite a big future for them in dairying if they choose to go dairying. They can work their way up to run a fairly substantial business and make quite a bit of money and or have a good lifestyle.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because if you've got some talented, hungry people that want to progress through, there's no point cooking them early on in their career with massive hours, is there?
No, definitely not. And I think the vast majority of farm owners have learned from that. So yeah, I think that's working pretty well. Personally, I'm hoping I can hire a couple of airline pilots.
Oh, I know, right? Oh, every time I see an Uber driver do a poor job, I think, hang on a minute, mate, it was a bus driver the other day too, wasn't it, Joel, that we were talking about? I said, Joel, you just say to him, you just watch out, there's a lot of unemployed airline pilots out there, mate. But yeah, no, absolutely. That's fantastic to hear, actually, Richard, that we're on the right track there, absolutely as well. Thank you so much, man of multiple hats, Richard McIntyre. Before you go, Richard, whereabouts in New Zealand do you live, in which rural community, and why do you love it?
So our rural community is Puratawhara, which is directly between Foxton and Levin in the Horowhenua.
Fantastic. Great little
It's
spot.
it's a fantastic little community. We've got the school borders on the farm, and they do their cross country throughout paddocks every year.
Yeah.
Just awesome community orientated farm. When we had the low milk price years a few years back, we just bought our herd, and the number of people we didn't know very well that just came up to us to see how we got getting on and sort of have a bit of a chat about the times that they've found tough, and that was really special.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard McIntyre. He's on the Wellington Council, their fishing game, as well as the Federated Farmers chair of the Share Milkers Committee.
This is Sarah's Country.